So we'll open up the jail committee meeting. So in our previous meeting, well, let me back up. I like to start from scratch, where we started. We've looked into different things. We've been dealing with this for, I guess, close to a year. And we've looked on, we first looked into building onto the building. That was the first thing we looked at. Can we build onto the current facility to get us, certified, and then we found out that the current building that we're already using, those 52 cells are still under a plan of action anyway, so we can't really utilize what's there. Building on normally would help, but our facility is so antiquated, it's not even feasible to house anybody in it. So we looked at building on beside of it before, and that first initial preliminary discussion and review of plans, we're like, well, we just can't fit what we need on that current piece of property. And it looked like it would save money by building onto another property. Then we had Susan Martin, our clerk, here. We had Brandon, our judge, here, and we spoke about the pros and cons of a jail and a justice center, what the different cost metrics that go into that, what would, longevity-wise, what would make more sense. We voted for a justice center at the time. And then we moved on to figuring out what the bed count would be on the facility that we needed. And we had the 150, 190, and 225 options on the housing unit. And then we kind of looked at what that cost would be. And that's kind of that was sticker shock, kind of backed us up. And then we're like, well, what is it going to look like on the existing property? We're trying to make any effort we can to save money. And I think that's what you should do. I think that was a good call. You always want to find something that is not burdening the citizens, our taxpayers, and ourselves. I mean, we're taxpayers. Every person at this table, if you're elected here, you pay property taxes. So we don't want to burden ourselves either, just like we don't want to burden everyone else. So we looked into what we discussed in our last meeting. We talked to John and said, well, I know that it's been told to us before in the past that we can't build where we're at, but if it's going to save us some type of money, is there some way we can cram everything into that same one piece of property that we're at? Will that save us any money from this sticker shock? So I'm going to give John an opportunity to get up and kind of present what he's got up here, and you're welcome to ask him questions. And go ahead.
Well, that's quite an intro. I'll see if I can follow that up, Mayor. John Eisenlau with Treanor HL. I'm a licensed architect in the state. I've worked on a number of facilities here before. Like I mentioned the last time we were together, and I'll kind of animate my boards in a minute, but I'll walk you through the first scenarios. We're calling them scenarios, not options. I have no idea why, but that's what my team decided to do. But I'll take you quickly back through scenario 1 and 2, and then tell you how we got to 3, okay, as the mayor kind of led in there a little bit. And I'll carry my mic with me. Might be helpful. Let me give you some math for consideration, because I'm not here advocating to build a jail or a justice center or a courthouse or anything like that. I'm just an architect that does a lot of these things, and I have a lot of the math in my head, and we do these routinely. So let me start by just kind of refreshing everybody's memory for a minute. As the mayor said, we were tasked with telling you what size facility you would need for as many as 225 beds. Okay, that was sort of the max number. Jim's analysis suggested a capacity of that level. I don't dispute that personally. So we took that as a starting point and said, if you built an entire facility that was 225 beds, and it had 4 courts, that was the magic number that was just supplied to us for the moment, Chances are you could use 4 courts in the future, so 4 courts is a good number. Just let me say that when you build courts, you should build them in pairs typically, because often they are serviced by holding areas. Not always, but sometimes, but it's a lot easier to build courts in pairs, just as sort of a design rule. So this building that we put forth last time we got together was roughly 100,000 square feet, 225 beds, and in my estimation, it would need to sit on approximately 14 acres. And the reason for that is that you have a considerable amount of public parking, you have a considerable amount of jail staff parking, and you have a considerable amount of courts parking, all of which need to be separated. And the public is never inside the fence line, but anybody that works for the court or works for the jail typically is what we call inside the fence line, so their cars can't be damaged, stolen, so on and so forth. Jails also require what's called a fire lane, which goes around your housing unit, and it's required by the municipalities to put a fire out. It has to be a certain distance from the building. It has to be made out of a certain type of material. There are a lot of these types of nuances to laying out a jail that are very critical to build a modern detention facility and courts combined. Our recommendation here was the jail itself, as you can see, which is attached to the housing. The courts has its own identity as a separate building, and of course the Sheriff's Administration building would as well. Typically we recommend this because you don't necessarily have to build it all at one time, right? You can master plan this, build the jail first, build the courts later, build the sheriff's admin. That's up to you, and that's typically reflective of funding and availability and so on and so forth. So this would be the ideal scenario in my mind. Then we stepped back and we said, well, how do we make that cheaper? And the way you make that cheaper is you basically put all that stuff in one big box, right? Makes sense. The box is a lot cheaper than spreading the building out typically. And that usually plays out. Bell Construction was here. I've known Rick for years. And that's pretty much a true story. So if you were going to do that, you actually might save a little more money if you do that. And that's where we sort of concluded. And then y'all asked me to take a look at your existing site. And this was pretty interesting because we had our team look at, first of all, if you built an entirely new jail on the property, what would that look like? The new jail, by the way, is roughly 71,000 square feet. So you can, if you choose to do so, build a new building on this property right here, 1 story, 2 stories, 3 stories, 4 stories tall. Okay, now how the guts of the building work, we'd have to work with the sheriff a little bit, but numerically, if you take 225 inmates, you multiply them times 350 gross square feet per detainee, which is the industry standard, and you stack that number on 4 floors, believe it or not, it fits. And the sheriff could continue to operate right where he is. Now it's going to be extremely disruptive, number one, to build next to him, but you could build this building next to the sheriff. I would then recommend that you tear the jail down and you build a new courts building adjacent to it. And if the sheriff needs more space, he can go into this basement a little bit. You know, he may need more storage, things like that he's mentioned, or it's just court support downstairs as well and just part of the overall program. But think about this for a minute. The first floor could be all of your clerk functions, and then you have courts stacked on 2 floors above it. And what's really nice about this particular option is that you can quickly get from the housing units to the courts, right? So, and you could build this entire complex if you wanted, if it was properly funded up front. You just wait till the new building is constructed, tear the old one down, build your courts building. Then you could move out of your courts building, as we were just discussing, and use that for administrative services, which I've seen done time and time again. I've seen people lease their courthouses for weddings and historic events. Now there's some challenges with this idea because I just told you needed a lot of parking, and we just simply did not solve that with the diagrams that we're showing here, right? There's limited parking. There's no question about that. So there's some deficiencies, in my opinion, about the parking that could be problematic on the site. And we'd have to spend a lot of time talking to the sheriff's department about how this housing is specifically organized in the building so that we don't increase his staffing requirements. So for example, when Jim walked in, he said 3 floors of housing. Just think about this for a minute. The previous idea that we developed, it had 2 staff stations. These purple boxes are staff stations, and they supervise all these individuals. With this concept, the sheriff only has 2 individuals, well, 1 individual sitting in each of these staff stations, and then there's the relief factor that's applied in the rovers on this floor. I've created 3 floors here for him, so that's more staff. But we could come back to a mezzanine-style housing plan, and convert those into actually 2 levels, and it would still fit. I know you all may not understand that, but I'm confident that that could happen. So we would have to very carefully program this idea with the sheriff, if everybody thought this was the right way to go, or at least an option, that you frankly probably want to explore, in my opinion. And you could also explore this at the same time, and we could certainly do that with you and show the pros and cons of both of them. But the interesting takeaway, I think, tonight is that it is conceivable that you could build on your current location.
And how many beds is this?
This could be as many as 200, 200 and change, 225.
And in the picture you've got in your hand, that's one level.
That is
One level.
the building itself is one level. The housing units have mezzanines.
But they're on one level, right?
That is, it's technically one level. That is correct, but it has a mezzanine that you look up at the inmates that are on the upper level.
But you could also do 2 levels.
You could, absolutely. That was our starting point to get everybody as low to the ground as possible. Yeah, this would basically be a 3-story building on top of, I'll call it the first level or the basement. But, technically 4-story building. Your building code allows you to go 75 feet it's usually from the fire department connection to the top accessible level of the building. So as long as we stayed 75 feet, you could stack the building vertically. And Jim and I were just talking about this. There are some examples in Tennessee of, I call them vertical jails rather than horizontal jails. There's pros and cons of it, and the sheriff knows that. It just is what it is, right? Based on your site, that's unfortunately what you got, rightly or wrongly. But if you wanted to entertain ways of using it, the first thing you would do is get some soil samples and see if we can stack the building that high and get a good survey. And then I can tell you definitively whether it would work. But they were all, all the versions are as much as 225. Yeah. Yep. And again, as we were chatting earlier, some of these are medical, some are mental health, some are women, some are men. That gets into kind of the programming phase and a little deeper dive with the sheriff and his staff. But I was particularly surprised that the courts would actually fit over there. That's something that, frankly, we hadn't even contemplated. But it is, I'll use the term feasible. It takes more study, but it may not be out of the question, frankly.
So that's what has to be a 3 level.
This is 1, 2, 3, 4. The housing. Right now, we laid it out as 3 levels, but we could convert it into 2 levels, so there's less staff required.